badge number right now. I need your badge number and your supervisor's name.
Ma'am, step out of the line.
I will not step out. I have federal credentials. I am entitled to...
I need backup. Pre-check lane 2. We've got a situation.
There is no situation. You created this situation.
These people. Every single time.
At 7:42 a.m. inside Charlotte Douglas International Airport, a police officer stepped in front of a black woman standing in the TSA Pre-Check line and informed her, with the flat certainty of a man who had never once been wrong, that she did not belong there. The woman was wearing a fitted navy blazer over a white silk blouse. She carried a leather portfolio and a manila folder, thick, with case briefs. Tucked inside her left hand, pressed against the portfolio's edge, was a federal judicial identification card, gold embossed, laminated, bearing the seal of the United States District Court, alongside a diplomatic courtesy pass recognized at every U.S. port of entry in the country. Her name was Monnique Daniels. She was 54 years old, a Harvard Law graduate, a former assistant U.S. attorney with 22 years of federal prosecution experience. Appointed to the federal bench by the President of the United States, confirmed by the Senate, and currently en route to Washington, D.C. for an emergency Supreme Court proceeding that could not be delayed, rescheduled, or handed to another judge. The officer blocking her path was Darren Kovac, 43. He had been with the Charlotte Airport Police Department for 16 years. In those 16 years, he had accumulated 31 documented complaints, excessive force, racial targeting, intimidation of minority travelers, and had never once faced formal discipline. Not a single suspension, not a single written reprimand that resulted in consequences. Just a paper trail that his supervisors had quietly folded away, year after year, like something too embarrassing to frame and too useful to destroy. Kovac had made his decision in the time it takes a man to finish a sentence. He didn't check her credentials. He didn't scan her identification. He looked at her, took in everything the moment offered him, the suit, the briefcase, the posture, the skin, and reached the only conclusion his 16 years of unchecked authority had ever taught him to reach. What happened in the next 11 minutes was recorded by 9 security cameras, one personal body camera that Kovac would later claim had malfunctioned, and a retired JAG colonel standing 12 feet away who had the presence of mind to press record before Kovac's hand ever left his belt. Monnique Daniels had been through this line 100 times. Charlotte Douglas was her home airport. She knew the layout the way a surgeon knows an operating theater, every checkpoint, every lane marker, every TSA agent who gave her a nod of recognition on the early morning flights. She had her pre-check enrollment number memorized. She had her judicial ID in the same pocket every time, front left, easy access, the same way she kept her courtroom demeanor, prepared, unhurried, unshakable. She placed her portfolio on the belt, slipped off her watch, and stepped toward the scanner. Kovac materialized at her left shoulder like something that had been waiting for a reason. "You're in the wrong line." Daniels turned and looked at him the way she looked at attorneys who cited case law incorrectly, with a patience that had edges on it. "I have pre-check enrollment. I've been in this line for 6 years. This line is for verified travelers." He said it like it was the end of the conversation, like the sentence had a door at the back of it, and he had already closed it. Daniels reached into her left pocket without drama and produced her credentials. The federal judicial ID, gold embossed, laminated. The seal of the United States District Court, pressed into the surface with the kind of permanence that doesn't ask permission. She held it out flat in her palm, the way you present something to someone who you expect to read it. Kovac looked at it the way a man looks at something he has already decided is irrelevant. "These are fake." 2 words. No hesitation. No examination. He didn't take the card. Didn't hold it up to the light. Didn't attempt to scan it against the federal database that every airport law enforcement terminal in the country has direct access to. He looked at the credential of a sitting federal judge, appointed by the President of the United States, and he said 2 words with the casual authority of a man who had spent 16 years being wrong without consequence. "These are fake." Daniels did not raise her voice. People who have spent 22 years in federal courtrooms do not raise their voices. They don't need to, because the room is always listening. "Officer, I need you to scan that identification. That is a federal judicial credential, with a verification code on the reverse side. You are required by TSA protocol to run it." "Step out of the line, ma'am." "I will not step out of the line. I am a federal judge traveling on official business to an emergency Supreme Court proceeding. If you scan that card, this conversation ends in 30 seconds. Kovac stepped closer, not because he needed to. The movement was architectural, a deliberate reduction of the space between them, designed to communicate something that words would have made too obvious. He was bigger than her. He wanted her to feel that. He needed her to feel that. Because the only power he had left in this exchange was physical proximity, and he was already reaching for it. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again. And I'm not going to ask you again either. Your badge number. Right now. And your supervisor's name." That was the moment. The exact moment when something shifted behind Kovach's eyes. Not anger, not surprise, but something older and uglier than both. It was the look of a man who had issued a command and been refused by someone he had already decided didn't have that right. And now the refusal itself had become the crime. He reached for his radio. If you have ever watched someone be treated like a criminal for the act of knowing their rights, then you already know what happened next. And if you haven't, stay with this story, because what this camera recorded in the next 8 minutes is something that an entire police department tried to make disappear. And the reason they failed is the reason this video exists. 11 feet away, Officer Marcus Stanton heard every word. Stanton was 29 years old, 3 years on the force, assigned to the pre-check corridor as part of his standard rotation. He was standing close enough to read the federal seal on Daniels' credential from where he stood. He knew what it meant. Every officer assigned to an international airport terminal goes through federal credential identification training as part of their mandatory onboarding. It's not elective, it's not optional. It is a required module with a written assessment at the end. Stanton had passed that assessment. He knew what a Fourth Circuit judicial ID looked like. He knew that the gold embossing on the card Kovac had dismissed in 2 seconds was not something a person prints at a copy shop. He said nothing. He looked at his shoes. He looked at the baggage belt. He looked at the ceiling, with the deliberate unfocus of a man performing the act of not seeing, which is a performance that requires tremendous concentration, because the thing you are pretending not to see is happening directly in front of you, and the sounds of it are getting louder. This is the part that doesn't make the news the way it should. The Kovacs of the world do not operate in a vacuum. They operate in a climate, and that climate is maintained by the Stantons, the men and women who are not cruel enough to participate, but are not brave enough to intervene. The wall is not built from monsters. It is built from silence, and silence is something that ordinary, non-monstrous people contribute to every single day. Stanton's silence lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The cameras caught all of it. Kovac's backup arrived in the form of Officer Rick Ingram, who had been Kovac's partner in the pre-check corridor for 3 years, and who, the investigation would later reveal, had a personal financial stake in what happened next. But that comes later. Right now, Ingram arrived fast. The way partners arrive when the radio call uses the word hostile, and the word hostile, in the vocabulary of Charlotte Airport Police, had a specific gravity that accelerated response times in ways that the department's own internal data would eventually document. Daniels was still standing, still steady, still holding her credentials out like a woman who understood that the law was the only weapon she was permitted, and she intended to use it with surgical precision. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. I am not going anywhere until someone scans this credential and produces a badge number." That is not a request. That is a legal requirement. And every second of this interaction is being recorded by at least 7 cameras in this terminal. Kovac's jaw tightened. He glanced at Ingram. Something passed between them. Not words, not a signal anyone could point to later, but the kind of communication that happens between 2 people who have done a thing before and are about to do it again. What happened next took 4 seconds. Kovac grabbed Daniels' left wrist. Not the professional 2-handed escort grip that use of force training requires. A single-handed grab, low and hard, twisting inward and upward, in the motion that shoulder anatomy was not designed to accommodate. Daniels gasped. The portfolio hit the floor. The manila folder opened, and case briefs scattered across the polished terminal tile like a sentence interrupted mid-argument. Ingram moved to her right side. And then Kovac yanked. The sound her glasses made when they hit the stainless steel screening table was the sound of something precise and expensive, hitting something cold and industrial, and it was followed immediately by the sound of Monnique Daniels, a 54-year-old woman, 5 feet 4 inches tall, 131 pounds, being introduced to that same surface with the full weight of a man who had spent the last 30 seconds deciding that she had earned this. Her face hit the table. Her left shoulder torqued at the angle that a physician at Presbyterian Medical Center would later describe in a report submitted to the FBI as consistent with forced hyperextension, resulting in partial labral tear and soft tissue damage to the acromioclavicular joint. Her cheek split on the table's edge, and Kovac placed his knee in the center of her back with the practiced ease of a man for whom this was not the first time and who had, until this morning, every reason to believe it would not be the last. "Stop resisting." She was not resisting. The cameras confirmed this. She had both hands flat on the table surface, fingers spread, in the universal posture of a person who is trying to communicate through their body that they are not a threat. She said, clearly enough for the audio track to capture it, "I am not resisting. I need medical attention. I am a federal judge, please." And then, because she was who she was, even with her cheek on a metal table and her shoulder on fire, she said, "Your badge number. I need your badge number." Kovac pressed his knee harder. Stanton watched from 11 feet away and did not move. Don't look away from this. I know this is hard to watch. It's supposed to be hard because it happened, and the people responsible for it almost got away with it. Stay with this, because what happens in the next 20 minutes is going to change everything. Colonel Emeka Okonjo had retired from the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps 14 months earlier, after a 26-year career that had taken him from Fort Bragg to Baghdad to the Pentagon's Military Justice Division. He was at Charlotte Douglas that morning on his way to his daughter's wedding in Atlanta, carrying a garment bag with his dress uniform in it and a phone that he had been meaning to replace for 6 months, because the camera on it was, in his words, embarrassingly good for something this old. He had been standing in the pre-check corridor since before Kovacs approached Daniels. He had watched the credential refusal. He had watched the radio call. He had watched Stanton's very deliberate study of the floor. And when Kovacs' hand closed around Daniels' wrist, Okonjo already had his phone out. He pressed record at the exact moment Daniels' glasses left her face. 26 years in military justice had given Okonjo a particular orientation toward evidence. He understood, with the bone-deep conviction of someone who had built and dismantled prosecutions for a quarter century, that what he was watching was a federal crime in progress, and that the footage on his phone was the difference between accountability and a department-generated narrative about a non-compliant, possibly hostile passenger who had required restraint. He kept the phone steady. He kept the frame wide enough to capture Stanton's inaction. He kept recording until Kovacs stood up, and Daniels was still. Then he dialed 911. This is Colonel Emeka Okonjo, retired JAG. JAG identification number follows. I am at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, TSA Pre-Check corridor, near Gate B12. I am reporting an assault in progress committed by a Charlotte Airport police officer against a civilian woman who identified herself as a federal judge and presented federal credentials. The officer has her pinned on a screening table. She is injured. She has asked for medical attention and been denied. I have video of the entire incident. I am not moving from this location. Send FBI, not local PD. Local PD is the problem. He stayed on the line for 11 minutes. He kept the camera on Daniels the entire time. Chief Raymond Foley arrived 22 minutes after Kovacs' radio call. He was a compact, red-faced man with the kind of administrative calm that comes from 2 decades of making problems smaller by reclassifying them. A use-of-force incident becomes a tense passenger interaction. A complaint becomes a misunderstanding. A pattern becomes a few isolated incidents that don't reflect the department's values. Foley was very good at this. He had been very good at it for a long time. He walked through the pre-check corridor with the measured stride of a man arriving to manage something, and then he saw Monnique Daniels sitting on the floor near the screening table with her hand pressed to her cheek and a paramedic kneeling beside her, and he saw the case brief still scattered across the tile, and he saw the federal judicial ID lying on the floor where it had fallen from her portfolio, gold seal facing up, the seal of the United States District Court catching the terminal's overhead lights. The color left his face in the way that color leaves a face, when a man who has spent 20 years managing problems suddenly understands that this is not a problem that can be managed. He turned immediately to the nearest officer and said, in a voice low enough that the nearest camera's audio barely caught it, "Get witness phones. All of them. Now." 3 officers began moving through the corridor. 2 passengers surrendered their phones without understanding why. A third argued. A fourth, a woman traveling with her teenage son, had already airdropped her footage to her laptop in her carry-on bag before the officer reached her, a detail that would matter considerably later. Foley crouched beside Daniels. He used his softest voice, the one he kept for liability situations, the one that was designed to sound like concern and function like containment. "Judge, I want to personally apologize for badge number," Daniels said. Her voice was steady, her cheek was bleeding, her shoulder was braced against her body at the angle that people hold injured things. "I want badge numbers for every officer involved. I want your badge number. And I want the name of your department's federal liaison, because this is going to the FBI by end of business today." Foley straightened up. He looked at Kovacs, who was standing near the baggage belt with the expression of a man who had done this 31 times and was waiting to be told, once again, that it was fine. And Foley, to his considerable professional misfortune, made the calculation that it was still possible to contain this. That a federal judge with a split cheek and a dislocated shoulder, surrounded by witnesses, with video on at least one phone he hadn't recovered, and a retired JAG colonel still on the phone with the FBI field office, was still a situation that could be handled internally. He was wrong. He had been wrong about a great many things over the years, but this was the one that was going to cost him personally. The FBI arrived while Foley was still in the terminal. Special Agent Dana Reyes of the FBI Civil Rights Division had been briefed in the car on the way over, and what she had been told. A federal judge, an airport police officer, 7 security cameras, and a retired JAG with footage on his phone told her everything she needed to know about the shape of this investigation before she walked through the door. She had worked civil rights cases for 11 years. She knew what the department's narrative was going to be before Foley delivered it, because there was only one narrative available to a department in this position, and it always contained the same load-bearing phrases. Policy was followed, the officer felt threatened, the passenger was non-compliant, and the inevitable cornerstone of every cover story involving body camera footage. The camera malfunctioned. Kovac's body camera had, according to the department's preliminary incident report, filed 3 hours after the assault, experienced a technical failure prior to the interaction, and recorded nothing. Reyes pulled the body camera's serial number from the department's equipment log. She submitted it to the FBI's Digital Evidence Recovery Unit by noon. The recovery unit ran it against the manufacturer's cloud backup system, because body cameras issued after 2019 under a specific federal equipment grant automatically upload footage to a cloud server in 30-second increments, a feature that is listed in the equipment manual, which Kovac had apparently not read, or had read and had not fully understood, or had understood and had decided, in the confidence of 16 years of consequence-free behavior, did not apply to him. The footage was there, all of it, 11 minutes and 44 seconds, beginning 90 seconds before Kovac ever approached Daniels' position in the pre-check line. In that 90 seconds, visible and audible and unambiguous, Officer Darren Kovac stood at the corridor entrance with Officer Rick Ingram and said the following: "You see the one in the Navy suit? I got 20 on her. Watch how fast I can move her." Ingram laughed. "You're not moving a pre-check. She looks like she belongs." "That's the point," Kovac said. And then he walked toward Monnique Daniels. "You need to sit with that for a second." He didn't approach her because he thought she was a security risk. He didn't approach her because of anything she did or said or carried. He approached her because someone in a Navy suit who looks like she belongs was, to Darren Kovac, the highest value target in the corridor. And he had $20 riding on it. The FBI didn't know yet how deep that $20 went. They were about to find out. The investigation into Kovac's body camera footage opened a door, and behind that door was a room that the Charlotte Airport Police Department had been carefully keeping locked for 4 years. The digital forensics team, following the thread of, "I got 20 on her," pulled Kovac's department-issued phone records under a federal warrant. What they found in his message history was a group chat with 14 members, all active Charlotte Airport police officers, with the name, and this is a direct quote from the FBI's filed evidence summary, Airport Safari. The rules of Airport Safari were simple. Officers earned points for stopping, detaining, or removing minority travelers from pre-check and expedited boarding lanes. Points were weighted. A successful removal earned 5 points, a detention that resulted in a missed flight earned 10, and a stop that produced what the chat referred to as a scene, meaning visible distress, raised voices, public humiliation, earned 25. There was a monthly cash prize. There were running leaderboards. There were, in the chat logs that the FBI extracted, photographs. 31 of Kovac's prior complaints, dismissed, unfiled, papered over, were in this context no longer isolated incidents. They were a scoring history. And Foley, whose phone was also on the federal warrant, had been in the group chat for 2 years. The chat log showed that Foley had never posted a score, had never sent a congratulations message, had never technically played the game, but he had been in the room while it was played, and he had received the message, where Ingram posted, "New record this week, 4 pre-check removals, someone bring me my money." And he had responded with a single thumbs-up emoji, which is the kind of participation that a federal prosecutor describes to a jury as, quote, tacit approval from a supervising officer, and which carries its own distinct entry on a federal indictment. This is the moment where I need you to understand something, because I think it's easy to watch a story like this and file it under one bad cop and move on with your day. Darren Kovac was not one bad cop. He was the visible edge of a system that had been running for years, with supervisory awareness, with departmental silence, with a betting pool that turned the harassment of human beings into a recreational activity with a monthly cash prize. Monnique Daniels did not just walk into a bad encounter. She walked into a machine, and the only reason that machine stopped is because she refused to be quiet about it, even with her face on a metal table. If this story matters to you, hit that like button right now. Not for the algorithm, for Judge Daniels. Because the number of people who see this is the number of people who know this happened. The federal trial lasted 11 days. The government's case was architectural in its thoroughness. 9 security camera angles. 11 minutes and 44 seconds of body camera footage that Kovac had believed was gone. 416 pages of Airport Safari chat logs. 31 prior complaint files that the department's own Internal Affairs Division had classified as resolved without findings. A medical expert who walked the jury through the labral tier report and explained, in terms that required no legal training to understand, that the injury to Judge Daniels' left shoulder was not consistent with standard restraint procedure. It was consistent with a deliberate wrenching motion applied to an unresisting person. Colonel Okonjo testified for 3 hours. He was precise, composed, and devastating. He identified himself, his service record, his JAG credentials, and his position in the corridor. He described what he saw from the moment Kovac approached Daniels to the moment the paramedic's hand covered the cut on her cheek. He identified every officer in the footage by uniform number. And when the defense attorney asked him if he was certain about what he'd seen, Okonjo looked at him with 26 years of military courtroom experience behind his eyes and said, "Counselor, I have reviewed evidence in cases tried before the International Criminal Court. I know what I saw." Kovac's defense argued that Daniels had been non-compliant and that the use of force was proportionate. The jury had seen the body camera footage. They had heard the words, "I got 20 on her." They had watched Kovac press his knee into the back of a woman who had both hands flat on the table. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 20 minutes. They came back guilty on all counts. Darren Kovac, guilty of deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated assault, and federal civil rights violations. Sentenced to 8 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. Lifetime ban from law enforcement at any level in any jurisdiction in the United States. Rick Ingram, guilty of deprivation of rights under color of law and conspiracy. Sentenced to 4 years. Chief Raymond Foley, guilty of obstruction of justice, evidence tampering. The phone seizure in the terminal had been captured on a security camera Foley didn't know existed, and failure to report known civil rights violations. Sentenced to 3 years and ordered to pay personal restitution. Marcus Stanton, the officer who had watched from 11 feet away and studied the floor, was not criminally charged. He was terminated. He was not eligible for rehire in any law enforcement capacity in the state. His name is in the public record. That is all the justice his particular silence was going to get. In the sentencing statement, the federal judge presiding over the case read from Kovac's body camera transcript, the moment before he walked toward Daniels. And then he looked at Kovac directly and said, "You did not make a mistake. You made a choice, and today this court finalizes the consequences of that choice." The Charlotte Douglas Airport Police Department was disbanded by federal order 8 months after the verdicts. In its place, the city established a new airport security authority operating under a federal consent decree that mandated independent oversight, body camera requirements with mandatory cloud backup, and a civil rights compliance officer reporting directly to the FBI's field office. Every officer seeking a position in the new authority was required to reapply, pass a federal civil rights screening, and serve a probationary period under monitored conditions. The settlement in Daniels versus City of Charlotte reached $21.1 million. It was the largest civil rights settlement in the history of North Carolina. Daniels donated the majority of it. The Daniels Justice Initiative launched 6 months after the settlement was finalized, a nonprofit providing free legal representation to victims of law enforcement civil rights violations, with a specific mandate to serve communities historically underrepresented in federal civil rights litigation. In its first year, the initiative took on 43 cases. It won 31 of them. On a Tuesday morning in October, 11 months after the assault, Monnique Daniels walked back into her courtroom in the federal courthouse in Charlotte. She was wearing the same navy blazer. Her shoulder had healed, mostly. There would always be a certain reach, a certain angle, that reminded her of a stainless steel table and a knee in her back. She had decided, in the months of recovery, that she was not going to let the reminder be only pain. A scar is evidence. Evidence is the thing that changes outcomes in a courtroom. She knew what to do with evidence. She sat down. She adjusted the microphone. The bailiff called the room to order. "The court is in session," he said. Judge Monnique Daniels looked out at the room, at the attorneys, at the gallery, at the flag standing in its corner, at the seal of the United States District Court on the wall behind her, and she picked up her gavel. The sound it made when it came down was clean and certain and final. The way justice sounds when it has been paid for at the correct price and arrives exactly on time. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know why it matters. Share this video. Not because the algorithm needs it, because the 26 people in that airport safari chat are still out there, in other airports, in other corridors, and the only thing standing between them and the next Monnique Daniels is the number of people who refuse to let this become a story that gets watched once and forgotten. Subscribe if you want to see every story like this told the way it deserves to be told. The next one drops soon.